Hey, welcome to another random walk down Mill Street. I am 7 minutes late. I apologize, but here we go. The topic for this evening is Modim de-Rabbanan, and if you are a synagogue attendee and recite the Amidah, then you know at least somewhat what is Modim de-Rabbanan. Um, but there is a particular, and we're going to talk briefly about the origin of the prayer and what it is. But really, what I want to talk about is a particular aspect of the minhag here in Sheretz Israel, which has not been well documented. And so, one of my objects in tonight's class is to document the custom as I know it here at Sheretz Israel. And so, what am I talking about? Let's get right into it. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Modim de Rabbanan. So in the Amidah, also known as the Shemona Esrei, the 18 blessings that we say at the centerpiece, really, of our daily prayers, towards the end of the series of blessings, in fact, I think it's the 18th blessing, we have the Modim, the Hoda'ah, Hatov Shemcha Ulchana Ela Hodot. I already have something in the chat. Let's see. I missed the tour. That's okay, Claude. You didn't miss anything. Can come next month for the tour. Um, uh, so the text, let's see here. Okay. The text of the beginning, before we get to the blessing part, is this paragraph called Modim. Comes at the end. I'm starting it here, but this is really the blessing that precedes the Hoda'ah. That's what we say in that it's a calling for the restoration of the temple practice, of the cult, of the temple cult, and of God's presence in the temple. So that's the end of that blessing, and then we go into something called the Hoda'ah, Modim Anachnu Lach. How you translate Modim Anachnu Lach is actually quite interesting. You might think, and I often think, that it means Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving blessing, which is accurate to some degree. Uh, but there is another aspect to this blessing. And if you look at Dr. Poole's translation, which I don't know if you can see or not, let me make this smaller. Dr. Poole says, "We acknowledge thee that thou art the Lord our God." He says, "We acknowledge thee." We're not giving thanks. We are admitting or acknowledging. We are being mekabel ol malchut shamayim, that we are accepting upon ourselves the yoke of heaven in this paragraph. And if you look at translations, you'll see various translations, most of them geared towards Thanksgiving. Some of them have this kabel ol malchut shamayim aspect to it. And the reason for that is really has to do with what is going on in the Modim Bracha. And one of the interesting things that I want to talk about, well, I'll hold off talking about the origin of the Bracha and the Talmudic sources. Before I mentioned earlier when we started that there is something that I want to document about the custom here at Sheretz Israel. And so the first thing I want to show you is the video that Rabbi Rode made during COVID. During the coronavirus, we couldn't come to synagogue. Rabbi Rode put up videos of daily mincha so that people at home could pray along with him, could learn how to pray. We couldn't come to minyan together, but we could, pray at the same time, or we could pray along with Rabbi Rode by tuning into his videos. And it was a nice documentation of our nusach. And so I want to listen to the way he says the Modim. And this is not only during COVID, this is the way he says the Modim all the time during daily tefillah. And it sounds like this.
ואתה ברחמך הרבים תחפוץ בנו ותרצנו ותחזינה עינינו ושובך לציון ברחמים ברוך אתה אדוני המחזיר שכינתו לציון מודים אנחנו לך שאתה הוא אדנו אלינו לאהותנו וללמד צורכנו ומגן ישכנו אתה הוא לדור ודור נודה לך ומצפר תהילתך על חיינו המסורים בידך ועל נשמותינו הפקודות לך ועל נסך שבכל יום עמנו ועל נפלאותיך ודורותיך שבכל ערב בבוקר בצהריים הטוב כי לא כלו רחמך המרחם כי לא תמו חסדיך כי מעולם קיבלו.
That is the way Rabbi Rode reads it. Not only for a video, that's the way he says the Modim every single day at Shachrit and when he and Mincha. And what I want to point out to you is that he says the words out loud. But that is not the way that I heard the Amidah said growing up in synagogue. And that is what I want to talk about tonight. And I have for you a recording. It is not a live recording. It is a recording of Nusach made by Bram Cardozo, the late Chazan of our congregation, and of the same passage. And it sounds like this.
המחזיר שכינתו לציון מודים אנחנו לך. הטוב כי לא כל רחמיך המרחם כי לא תמו חסדיך כי מרום קיווינו לך.
Now, what I really want to show you is the absence of something. And that is when Bram Cardozo read the passage here, the Modim here, he said, Modim anachnu lach, and then he went quiet. And he picked up at the words, Hatob kilo arachamecha hamlachem kilo tamu chasadecha. That is the way my ear says it's supposed to be done. Because that's the way I grew up. And that's what I want to, hopefully, at the end of the class tonight, have a little bit of appreciation for. Now, one of the things that I was searching for recording of is a live recording of our service, so I could show you what's done, but I could not find it. I also went searching for recordings of my grandfather. I could not find what I'm looking for. But what I want to say is when the Chazan goes silent, the congregation says this passage, which is what the title of our topic is tonight, the Modim de-Rabbanan. This is the Modim that the Chazan says, and this is the Modim de-Rabbanan, the rabbi's Modim, which the congregation says at the same time. And the custom that I grew up with and that I still maintain here in the synagogue is when the Chazan says Modim anachnu lach, we all bow, we say Modim anachnu lach, and then we recite this in undertone, and then what I remember my grandfather, I can hear him ringing in my ear. I just can't play it for you. But he says at the end of this silent period, he goes, Nal she'anu modim lach baruch el hahodaot. And then the Chazan, that's the cue for the Chazan to go, Hatob kilo chamecha. That's what allows the Chazan to go forward, is the shamash, or the leader of the congregation, or just the congregants themselves, singing out the last bit of the Modim de-Rabbanan. Nal she'anu modim lach baruch el hahodaot. That was every Amidah, at least that has a repetition, or that has the Modim, meaning everything that's not our beat. The Chazan would go quiet, and then one of the congregants would probably say it louder, but the congregation would sing the last words, and then the Chazan would go forward. It doesn't happen consistently these days because Rabbi Rode says it out loud. Not as loudly as the rest, but he says it out loud. And so there's not this back and forth with the Chazan. So now that you know this custom, most places will say the whole thing out loud. Some places the Chazan will say Modim anachnu lach, pause for the congregation to say the Modim de-Rabbanan, and then continue the whole thing out loud after that. That's less common, but it is one of the customs that you'll hear. Very few places do what we do here, which is to actually be quiet while both the Chazan and the congregation are saying their own separate version of this prayer coming together at the end. Okay. That's the introduction of the topic. So let's talk a little bit about the Modim. The Modim is actually an interesting prayer. If you look at the scholars, at least I'm not sure if this still holds to modern day scholars, but the sort of the classical scholars of Jewish liturgy, Modim is described as a prayer. The Hoda'ah is described as a prayer that was said already in temple days after the Korban Tamid. So the daily sacrifices offered by the Kohanim, and then they would say a Hoda'ah, and the people or the Kohanim or the people would bow when that was said. And so bowing is a central part of the Modim. Exactly the connection between bowing and saying this Modim is not perfectly spelled out, but it really has to do with this Kabel Ol Malchut Shamayim, which is why Dr. Poole translated, we acknowledge that you are the Lord, our God, more than just saying thanks. Saying thanks also is, nice to bow, but really acknowledging that God is or saying to God that He is our master requires some bowing down. So Modim has a special place. This is a Gemara from Masechet Brachot, Amar Rav Huna, Hanichnas lebeit hakneset. If you came to synagogue, umatzat tzibor shemitpalim, you came and they had already started. I can't even possibly imagine this happening. So it could never happen that you came and they already started the service. But I guess some people don't always come as punctually as I would imagine. Service has already begun, and you came to synagogue. Im yachol hatchil v'ligmor ad shelo yagia shliach tzibor limodim yitpalel. So if you come in and you listen to what they're up to, and you realize that you can say your prayers quickly and catch up before the congregation gets to the word modim, before not the congregation, the chazan says the words modim, then you should do so. Then you should catch up. The imlav al yitpalel. But if they're close to Modim and you can't catch up in time, then you have to wait. Wait till they say Modim, and then you can go forward. The second part of this quote is Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who has the same rule, but for the Kiddusha, not for Modim. So I want you to take away two things. One is, or really the main thing, Modim is really important. It's important. The rabbis thought it was very important to say it together with the congregation, not to miss it. Just as important as Kiddusha itself. Kadosh, 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 which everyone thinks is Dabash Kiddusha, has to be done with the minyan. So you don't want to miss that by saying your own prayers, so you have to wait till that's done in order to catch up. Same thing with Modim. People don't think of Modim as a Davar Shebikdusha, something that requires minyan. But in some way it is, because it has this special aspect that you have to wait to say it with the community. And it has this special thing where the congregants are saying something at the same time as the chazan. So what is the Modim de-Rabbanan? By the way, there is no text that tells you exactly what the Modim bracha is, that the chazan is supposed to say. Meanwhile, we have lots of texts for the Modim de-Rabbanan, which is quite interesting. What we basically say is an amalgam of all these things. So this is the Gemara in Masechet Sotah. And I'll look at the chat in a minute. But this is the main source for the Modim de-Rabbanan, the rabbi's Modim, which is said by the congregants while the Chazan is saying the standard text of the Shemona Esrei. Bisman sheshaliach tzibor omer Modim, at the time when the Chazan is saying Modim, ha'am mahim omrim, what does the congregation say? What do the people say? And then you get a whole listing of different ideas. Amarav, Modim anachnu lach, Adonai Eloheinu al sha'anu modim lach. That's it. One line. Shmuel says, Elokei kol basar al sha'anu modim lach. One line. Rav Simai says, Yotzreinu etzir bereshit al sha'anu modim lach. Nehardai Amrei Mishmei de Rabbi Simai, the yeshiva of Nehardai in the name of Rabbi Simai says, Berachot v'hodaot l'shimcha hagadol al shechayitanu v'kimatanu al she'anu modim lach. All of these are bits and pieces which we say, all of them together, as you'll see at the end. Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov Misayim Bahachi. Rabbi Acha finished the Kain Techayinu v'Tut Kabetzenu v'Tesov Galiotenu v'Chatzot Kodshecha l'Shmor Chukecha v'Lasot Ritzonacha b'Levav Shalem al she'anu modim lach. Everyone has these different phrases that should be said, and at the end, Amar of Papa Hilkach Nimrinhu Lechulhu. So therefore, we should say them all. Say them all. Everybody had a different version. Say them all. But you can imagine that in the days of the Talmud, or at least the customs that each of these rabbis is quoting, the Modim de-Rabbanan was very small. The Chazan said something, and the congregant said one line. One line, not this whole long paragraph. That's what I get from this Gemara. And somehow over time, even from the days of Talmud, so you see from Rav Papa, they amalgamated all of them together, and we get what we call Modim de-Rabbanan, various phrases that the rabbis said to say for the congregation to say while the Chazan is reciting his Modim. What the Chazan says for Modim, not spelled out in specificity. What the congregation says, great detail. One little point that's an aside, Modim is as we saw, Modim is important. It's almost like Kedusha. Another Mishnah, which I'm not showing you here, is there are theological sectarian issues in this blessing that the rabbis were concerned with. Not to say Modim, that people should think that you are worshiping two different gods. And if you look at the first Modim anachnu lach Hashem Elokeinu, al she'anu modim lach, you have Modim appears a couple times in the phrases. Now, it doesn't mean that you're saying Modeh Ani to one, Modim Anachnu Lach to two different things, but you get the idea that there could be some confusion, especially if there are sects that might have different views of the oneness of the Lord, meaning Christians or other Gnostic sects. And so this became a point of contention, and so another reason that Modim is special compared to some of the other parts of the Amidah, and it was given more attention by the rabbi. But here, in all of these, I can tell you that Modim means to give thanks. Maybe in some of them, Modim Anachnu Lach, yeah, these are. Well, there's a combination, right? Elokai kol basar al she'anu modim lach. This one might be more about acknowledging that God is our creator, and some of them are more about giving thanks. You get both aspects. They're similar in theme, but one is thanksgiving and one is accepting God as our Lord. Okay, this is the source for the text that we have. All these different lines that come together. Now I just want to show you halacha, which I sort of mentioned already. This is from the Shulchan Aruch, which is also quoting basically Yerushalmi. The congregation should bow. Lo yoter midai. They shouldn't bow too much. They should just bow for the phrase Modim anachnu la'ach. Shatav Eloheinu kol basar. V'chotem baruch el hahodaot. We say the ending of the Modim de-Rabbanan. We say Baruch El HaHodaot. Below Haskarat Hashem. You don't say the whole bracha. Just say Baruch El HaHodaot without the mentioning of the name. This is what I would call a compromise or a pshara of some kind, because in the Jerusalem Talmud and Yerushalmi, they have similar rabbinic phrases, which we're going to look at the end, for what the congregation should say when the Chazan is saying Modim, different ones than we had, longer ones. And they all conclude with a blessing. Ours, they just say Modim Anachnu Lach, they don't have a conclusion of a blessing. But the Jerusalem Talmud, the rabbis of the Jerusalem Talmud, of the Yerushalmi, Palestinian Talmud, say to end with a blessing with the name of Hashem, Baruch Atah Hashem, El HaHodaot. Blessed are you, God, of thanksgivings, of thanksgiving. And in fact, the Rosh, one of the early Rishonim, says to say that blessing when you're doing Modim de-Rabbanan. So already, that's already later than one would think that there's any confusion about the text. But the Shulchan Aruch, which codifies it, as well as the Rambam and others, say we don't use the same Hashem. Just say Baruch El, because they don't think you're supposed to say this blessing. Okay. The other thing to point out here, which I don't want to dwell too much time, is how long you're supposed to bow for. Some people bow just for the first three words, Modim Anachnu. Some people stay bowed down for the entire Modim. And then some people bow at the beginning and bow at the end, not in the middle. The most common is just bow for the first three words. I have seen people do it all different ways, but most people just do Modim Anachnu bowing and then they stand up. Now I see I have a lot of comments. I'm going to pause before we move on and take a look at the comments. Okay. Why does Ira do it out loud? That is what we're here to find out, or one of the things we're here to find out. Is it wrong for the Chazan to dip for the benefit of the Kahal to say Modim? Okay, this is what we're talking about. Who amalgamated them? Well, you saw already Rav Papa, or you said to say them all, so it's pretty early. Sorry, Alexander had to go. He'll catch the video. Thank you, Joseph. I like that. Close the doors. Can't come in if we got to the Amidah. Had to wait till it was over. But then you might miss it. I don't know. But I like that. That's a kind of formality that people don't have anymore, that people come in and out of the synagogue anytime they want. Okay. So now we've learned about Modim, but here's another. Now we're going to get back to the topic of saying it out loud. And this is more general halacha from the Shulchan Aruch about what happens if you forgot something in the prayers. Let's say you're a regular synagogue attendee, you were saying your Amidah, you forgot that it was Rosh Chodesh because you're so used to just saying the words, and you just said you forgot to say Ya'alev Yavo. And for purposes of not having any questions about minhagim, this is shachrit, not mincha, just the morning prayer, where there is a silent Amidah and a repetition by the Chazan. So what would happen if you forgot to say Ya'alev Yavo? It's an important prayer. You would have to go back and say it on your own. If you weren't with a minyan, you'd have to say the whole Amidah over again. But you're with a minyan, and the Chazan is about to say the repetition. So says the Shulchan Aruch. Mishashach v'lo amar Ya'alev Yavo v'Rosh Chodesh, or on Chol HaMoed, you'd have forgot to say some of the additions, Ya'alev Yavo. Or anything that you would have to, if you forgot something that you would have to repeat, or one of these kinds of things. What do? You should have intention to listen to the Chazan when he says the repetition of all the 18 brachot, merosh v'ad from the beginning to the end. Ke'adam shemitpalel la'atzmo v'lo yafsik. So you have to listen to the whole Chazan, and you have to have the intention that you are listening to the Chazan the whole time, from the beginning to the end, and not make any interruption. Okay? That is what the Shulchan Aruch says. Now, commenting on this in the 20th century is the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is Yitzhak Cohen Miradin, and it's pretty standard in Ashkenazic world today to follow much of what the Mishnah Berurah says. But I'll tell you as an aside, the Mishnah Berurah tries to eliminate questions by making compromises. Usually. This is not the case in this situation. But frequently, our synagogue or places that have very established minhagim are not so concerned with the concerns that the Mishnah Berurah has. But they are widespread. So let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says here. Meirosh vad sof. So he says you have to listen. If you forgot something and you have to listen to the Chazan in order to be yotze, your obligation to fulfill your obligation for the Amidah. Ayin b'sefer. Okay, he says to look somewhere. Shelo yomar as modim de-Rabbanan. He should not say the modim de-Rabbanan. He's trying to be yotze with what the Chazan says. So he's not supposed to say modim de-Rabbanan according to this. He should have the intention to listen to the Chazan say the Modim, the regular Modim. Shehu Omer, that he said the first time. V'ha'idna shenohagim eze chazanim lomar hamodim betchilato belachash. V'lo yuchal latzeit letfilato al yedei hashliach tzibor. V'lo yadati me'eze makom yatsa lahem haminhag hazeh. He heard that there are chazanim who will mitchilato, from its beginning of the Modim, say it quietly. They will not say the Modim out loud. And therefore, anyone who's saying it along, saying the Amidah along, who's fulfilling their obligation by listening to the Chazan, according to this, will not fulfill their obligation because they will not have heard these words of Modim. And he has no idea where this custom came from, and basically says that you shouldn't do it. So that is what I remember hearing this when I was in high school, that places that say the Modim quiet, the Chazan who says the Modim quietly is doing the wrong thing. Modim should be said out loud. And Mark Aaron asked me why Rabbi Rode does it that way. It's not because of the Mishnah Berurah, but it's the same idea. It's because the Chazan is, one of his obligations is to read it out loud for those who are not familiar with the words and can't say it on their own. And so all the words of Modim should be said out loud. That is the idea behind that custom. Now, here's where things get a little complicated. I could just tell you that some people do it this way, but Spanish Portuguese does it differently. But apparently, even within the Spanish Portuguese world, there is some differences. So what we're looking at here, and before I go on, I'll just take a look at the chat. Okay, Minhaj, okay. I think this is the anticipating what we already said. We're looking at the Keter Shem Tov, written by Shem Tov Gagin in the middle of the 20th century, in the 1940s, about the Modim de-Rabbanan. And he says, Minhag London ve Amsterdam, the custom in London and Amsterdam, that's the Spanish-Portuguese custom, Shebechazarat hashmona esrei, in the repetition of the Amidah, Omer hashliach tzibor modim bekol ram. The cantor says the modim out loud, not like what I grew up hearing. V'hatzibor oneh tekaf umiyad baruch el hahodaot. And the congregation says at the same time, immediately, Baruch el hahodaot, which is the end of the Modim de-Rabbanan. V'nikar hadavar she'ein hatzibor yesh lehem hizdamnut lomar hamodim de-Rabbanan b'shleimuto. And it appears to him that the congregation has not had the opportunity, hasn't had enough time to actually say the whole Modim de-Rabbanan in its entirety. But that was the custom that he's recording, that the Chazan would say Modim anachnu lach, and while the Chazan is saying Modim anachnu lach, the congregation would say Baruch el hahodaot. I want to save what he says afterwards, really for what we're going to talk about later, but I'll just read the beginning. Uma yafa uma na'im. Minhag Eretz Yisrael v'Syria Tukrim Mitzrayim kishmagiach shliach tzibor l'modim anachnu lach omer rak elu hagimel hatevot b'kol ram. How nice and how proper, how beautiful the custom of Eretz Yisrael and Syria and Turkey and Egypt was or is, where the Chazan only says modim anachnu lach v'hashar omro b'lachash. Everything else is said quietly. Why, we'll get to later. But he is recording that the Spanish-Portuguese custom is to say it out loud. All the other Sephardic groups is to say it quietly. Claude, you got to tell us what's done in the Syrian community. Got to tell us. They say it quietly or they say it out loud. And if anyone knows what they do in the Turkish communities or the Egyptian communities or in Eretz Israel, among the Sephardim, let us know in the chat. So this was very confusing to me because when you grow up, you think you know something. You think you know, I know what the Spanish-Portuguese custom is. It's to be quiet. Everyone else is saying it out loud, but the Spanish-Portuguese custom is not to. And then suddenly I read in Keter Shem Tov, no, in Amsterdam and London, they're doing it out loud. And what we do in New York is not what I thought was supposed to be the Portuguese custom. So I wanted to verify that this was in fact the case. And so I called my friend Daniel Chalfon this afternoon. And he told me, yeah, in fact, this is what happens. The Chazan says it out loud. Congregation also says it very quickly out loud. And then they say, Baruch El HaOdot. But he told me something very interesting. He said there's a particular place where the congregation says Baruch El HaOdot. And he told me that I could hear it on a particular recording from the tercentenary celebration in London of the Jewish settlement in London from 1956. So that's what we're going to listen to next. So here's the Modim. And now we're going to listen to, this is Eliezer Abinun, the late Chazan of the London community of Lauderdale Road, at this special service. So the special service is said they have a choir. They don't always have a choir at Daily Minyan, but this is with a choir. So it's probably said a little slower than normal, but this is the way they do it every time they say the Amidah, according to Daniel Chalfon. Starting a little earlier than the text. So I don't know if you could hear it. I don't know how well you could hear it or not, but this is the minhag in London. When they get to the blessing, everyone says Amen or Modim anachnu lach. The Chazan continues Ledor Vador. When he gets the words Ledor Vador right here at the beginning, the congregation comes in. This is the minhag. The minhag is for the Chazan to be shouted over in the middle of the Modim by the congregation in this particular place. And it's very jarring to me. I don't know how you take this, but that's their custom there. And so it does a couple of things to me. It confirms what Keter Shem Tov told us. In fact, you can actually hear it. And it leaves me with a lot of questions about how that minhag developed. But we're going to go back to, can we, we saw the Shulchan Aruch, we saw the Mishnah Berurah, we hear the minhag in London and Amsterdam. Amsterdam, I don't know what they do. I have to ask anyone who knows. Meaning, I don't know how the congregation does the Modim de-Rabbanan, but the Chazan does say it out loud. I haven't heard live recordings. I know it from recordings of Chazan Nabarro teaching how to say the Amidah. So I don't know what it actually sounds like when they're both saying it together. Is anybody saying it out loud at the same time, or is it just the Chazan alone? So now we have to go back and figure out why it's being said quietly here, and apparently by other Sephardic groups. And I'm going to pause here to see if anyone has any other customs that they're going to mention to us. So I don't know what Claude means by dip. Do you mean dip their voice low? Is that what you mean? Say they go quiet? Chazim used to dip, but no more. Rabbi Moshe Shama said no, as I stated earlier. So I think what you're saying, Claude, and you can confirm or deny, that it was once the custom in the Syrian community that when they got to Modim, the Chazan went quiet, or at least very low, while everyone said the Modim de-Rabbanan, and that has been changed in most of the Syrian world. Okay, got it. Thank you, Claude. Which is quite interesting. Here's the Abu Duraham. Everyone should bow. When the Chazan gets to the Modim, everyone should bow. They say a short acknowledgement, a short thanksgiving. Kamo came to Modim she'ein derech ha'eved. She'ein derech ha'eved lehodot lerabo v'lomar lo adoni ata al yedei shaliach. This is very important. He says, why is there a Modim de-Rabbanan? Why are the rabbis saying to say something else? Why can't you, just like anything else, listen to the Chazan and say Amen? He says, because a servant doesn't acknowledge their servitude to their master through an intermediary, through an agent. You don't send someone, to be your shliach, to acknowledge the ownership or the master, to acknowledge your master. You have to do that on your own. So the rabbis are saying that everybody needs to say Modim on their own. You cannot fulfill your obligation for Hoda'ah by just listening to the Chazan. You have to say something on your own. That is what Abu Draham says right here in the second line. Kol Adam tzarich lekabel befiv ol malchut shamayim. This is why Dr. Poole uses the word acknowledge rather than thanksgiving. Everyone has to accept the yoke of heaven for themselves. They can't do it through the Chazan. V'im mikabel al yedei shliach. If you do it through an agent, eina kabbalah gemura. It's not a complete acceptance. Aval b'shara tefillah she'bakasha yachol litbo v'tzorchav al yedei shliach. The whole rest of the Amidah you can fulfill by listening to the Chazan and saying Amen, but not Modim. Okay, that's the most important part of this Abu Draham, because that is why in some communities, in our community, at least the way I grew up, and in the Syrian community, the way it was in the past, the Chazan did not say the Modim out loud, because everyone has to say it for themselves. And that's why that whole thing exists. That's why the whole Modim de-Rabbanan, it's not just something that the rabbis instituted something special. It's because everyone has to say something for themselves. And I will leave you with where the Abu Draham got this from, which is from the Yerushalmi. We didn't see it until now, even though it chronologically comes earlier. And this is the Talmud Yerushalmi in Masechet Brachot. The first line talks about everyone bowing down when the Chazan says Modim, which we saw probably comes from the temple. And then we have Rabbi Zeira Amar Ubilvad b'Modim. He says only for Modim, not for the whole thing. Someone else says to do it in the beginning and the end. Okay. Rabbi Yossi Kad Desalik Lahacha. Once Rabbi Yossi came here. And what this means is he was a Babylonian Amorah, and he came to Palestine, he came to Israel. Chamtein Gechanin Umlachashin. Amarlon Mahudein Lechisha Velo Shmi'ah. He saw that everyone bowed down and went quiet and said something quietly. And he says to them, what is this quietness that you can't hear anything? And then the Gemara in Yerushalmi goes a long list of rabbis who had different phrases. Everyone had their own, like we saw in the Gemara in Sotah, all the rabbis in Palestine had their own phrases that they said. But the difference here is that they all ended theirs. Oops. Why did that close? I don't know why that closed. But they all ended theirs with the bracha. Baruch atah Hashem el hahodaot. That we saw earlier in the Shulchan Aruch. And so my point here in closing is, it seems pretty clear to me that from the Abu Draham and from the Yerushalmi that the Modim was said quietly, at least in Israel. It wasn't known to Rabbi Yossi. He said, "Why is everyone going quiet?" He was surprised. He came to a new place and they did the Amidah differently. But at least there was already in the Talmudic time, they went quietly and they said the Modim, because everyone had to say it for themselves. You couldn't just have a shliach tzibor do it for you. And that's the origin of our custom that I'm calling our custom. And I want to document it before it's lost. And that's the way, when I lead the services, that's the way I do it. And that's the way I hear my grandfather's voice. And then the Chazan can go forward. And the last thing I wanted to say is my own innovation, is that the Modim language, that the Modim de-Rabbanan and the Modim that they're saying in the Siddur does not include the blessing, right? It's just the Thanksgiving part in the beginning. And so for those who are upset that the rabbi said you have to say your own Modim and you can't fulfill your obligation with what the Chazan says, but really you're already done by the time you said that Modim. And the bracha is said by the Chazan. Hatov shimcha ulcha na'eh lahodot. So you can fulfill the textual obligation and hear the blessing and say Amen, but you should also say your own Modim when you say your own Amidah, or when you're hearing the rabbi, the Chazan, do it as well. I hope I've explained that. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to pause it here. I'm going to stop the recording and let everybody speak to each other. And I hope I've explained our custom. Okay. What do you think? Anybody?
Do you end up saying it loud?
I didn't catch it.
The way you're doing it. You give them a chance to say Modim Anachnu Lach Baruch El Haodaot, right? You give them a chance.
The way that I grew up, the way that the Spanish Portuguese New York custom is, or the way I think it ought to be, is the Chazan says Modim Anachnu Lach with the Kahal, then he goes quiet. The Kahal says Modim de-Rabbanan. The Chazan says the Modim, the regular Modim of the Amidah. The Kahal then says Nal she'anu modom lach baruch el hahodaot, and the Chazan picks up from Hatob.
With normal volume. Normal volume.
Normal volume.
Sure. Should there be any difference between Shacharit and Musaf? For Shacharit, everybody in the Kahal has already said a Modim. On Musaf, if they're reading along with the Chazan, they haven't said a thing.
So this is very relevant. I tried to avoid this question, but I think it is very relevant, because in the Spanish Portuguese tradition, not only for Musaf, also in daily Mincha, the Chazan goes quiet after the Kedusha
and says everything quiet.
And in Mincha, right? And so the people are doing their own thing. In the Musaf, there's only one. There's no silent Amidah. So everyone is supposed to say their own thing, unless you don't know the prayers. Then you listen to the Chazan. And then in the daily Mincha, the Chazan picks up at the end there, specifically to say this.
No, doesn't the Chazan from Musaf start again out loud on Modim?
The Chazan and Musaf, the Chazan, there's no silent Amidah.
No, but
right. So this is two different things that are conflicting with each other. That's why I don't have a consistent answer. In Musaf, there's no silent Amidah. So what are you supposed to do? Right? I get asked that question all the time. My answer is you can say it along with the Chazan till the Kedusha. After the Kedusha, you can go on your own speed and go at your own pace, faster, slower than the Chazan, do whatever you want to do. But the truth is, you should say the Modim de-Rabbanan. I didn't, but
not the regular Modim.
Right. In the weekday mincha, everyone is saying their own Amidah, and there's no out loud. There's no chazara. I mean the rabbi says the first three brachot, the chazan says the first three brachot, then he goes silent. Everyone says the Amidah.
So you never say Modim de-Rabbanan.
And then they pick it up. No, but they pick it up at Ritzei, specifically for this. They pick it up specifically so the congregation gets to say Modim de-Rabbanan. So my question is, if you are reading along with Chazan, whether it's Musaf or any other Amidah, if you are being Yotze, if you are relying on the Chazan to say the words because you forgot Ya'aleh Yavo, or because you're not familiar enough with the words to say them, and you get to Modim, what are you supposed to do? At least from the Abu Draham, and from what I think from the Yerushalmi, is you don't say the Modim that we call the Modim that the Chazan says. You say your own Modim. You have whatever words you say. I think from the Talmudic era, it doesn't matter what you say. You have to say some kind of hoda'ah. Because that's why there's so many different phrases. That all the rabbis have a different phrase. You have to say something for yourself. It's not enough to hear the Chazan. Then you'll hear the Chazan who says Hatov Shemcha Elchana Ela Hodot, and you can say Amen to that blessing. But you have to say something with your words. I think that's the essential halacha. I'm not a rabbi.
You saw what I posted that Rabbi Lamb once corrected. I used to have the custom when I was Chazan at the center of saying the first Modim Anatullah and then being quiet and then saying Hatov Shemcha. And he corrected me. And he said, you have to say the whole Modim word by word out loud. Otherwise, you're deficient in the Chazaras Hashatz.
So you had our custom. Where did you learn it? Is that the way they did it in KJ?
No, I think that's the way they did it at the IS.
Huh.
And then when I went to the Jewish Center, and I was the Chazan, so I followed that minhag. And I think we used to do it that way in high school as well. And Rabbi Lamb specifically corrected me.
So what I'm hearing from you, Larry, is that at least among the big modern Orthodox synagogues in the Upper West Side, a lot of them did what I'm used to, where they went quiet.
But I'm not sure they do it anymore.
I don't think any of them do it anymore.
Yeah, no, I think Rabbi Lamb managed to get everybody and headed in a different direction and to say the whole thing out loud by the chazan. And everybody, what they want to say to themselves, they say to themselves.
Right. Huh. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you.
So did anybody have, what I'm interested in, does anybody have this custom that I saw written, but I have not experienced, maybe in Israel, I think I have once in a while, but not realized it till I examined this, where the Chazan says, Modim Anachnu La, waits for a little while, and then says the whole thing out loud. Anyone experience that?
Used to be.
Yeah, no.
Like
if the Chazan is saying the whole thing out loud, he might give a little pause, Modim Anachnu, and then pause for a second, and then continue saying out loud the regular Modim. And during the pause, the people have the possibility of saying whatever they want to say.
Right.
But I've never seen that documented. That's sort of a custom of the Chazanim and the Shlichei Tzibur.
Yeah. It's something that people experience, and there's not a lot of documentation about these minhagim.
No, and then, very interesting.
Yeah. Thank you all. So I think I answered this, Claude. Do we end up saying no, we don't say all the words out loud. At least that was the custom that I grew up with, that I follow. The Modim is said quietly. Okie doke.
Okay.
You just said you keep the same volume.
Not in Sheretz Israel.
Okay.
You
Okay.
said, you just said that.
No, we say it quietly.
No, but you personally, you said when you're Hazan, you you say Modim, and
Modim anachnu lach, silent.
and then they say what? Baruch Elahu Daot, and then you continue loud, right?
You continue from Hatov Shimcha. You continue from the end.
You as Hazan, what do you do?
The Chazan does not say. You say those. You say the Modim silently, and you only pick up. And I'll tell you the words if I look in the page.
You just told me you keep the same volume.
You keep the same volume for the end. I didn't. I misunderstood what you were
No,
asking me. I
the whole
misunderstood what you're
thing.
asking me. You go
You have to
completely
say,
silent. You don't say it in undertone. You say it completely silently to yourself. The same way the
oh,
congregation is saying the Modim de-Rabbanan, you're saying the Modim of the Amidah, of the Yudchet, and you say, then you Hatov Kilo Chalu Rachamecha. That's where you start.
like
Hatov.
Cardozo,
Yeah.
like Cardozo.
Exactly like Cardozo. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okie doke.